All right, everybody. Good morning to you. I want to start off by just addressing something really quickly. I bet that you noticed that I put in the grades for the French Revolution exams yesterday. And I just want to say this, and I am not calling anyone specifically out or anything like that, but it needs to be said. So, I've been teaching this class a while, and I know my tests well, and the tests that I give you in this class are deliberately designed to mimic the AP European History exam's difficulty. And with that, I know that the tests are very hard. Okay, I know that the tests are hard. They're deliberately hard because on the AP exam, they make the questions hard enough where they can distinguish between people who know what they're talking about and people who have no idea what they're talking about. It gives you a wider spread to gauge people's knowledge the harder you make the test. If you make the test too easy, everybody gets an A on it, and then you have no comparison to see who knows their stuff and who doesn't. My tests are designed to do the exact same thing. I usually expect the average score on the raw score of the exam to be somewhere in the area of about 50 to 65%. That was not the case for this test. The test that you guys just took, and I'm not making this up when I say this, it was the highest average of any test that I have ever given in any class in European history. And while I would love to believe that that was because I'm just an amazing teacher and somehow miraculously taught the French Revolution via distance instruction better than I've ever taught it in the classroom before, I'm also not a fool. And because of my degree of skepticism, I suspect that there were at least a handful of people, if not more, who took it upon themselves to utilize, we'll say, outside resources while taking the test in order to get the best score possible. Now, I don't know the extent to which that happened. Maybe some of you really did score that well, and if you did, that's fantastic. However, if you were somebody who cheated on the test for the purposes of saving your own grade, I need to tell you that this is absolutely something that I do not condone. I think it is dishonest. I think it lacks integrity, and I don't like it. So if you were one of those people, shame on you. That's all I can say. Because the scores were so high on this exam that had I actually applied the curve the way that I usually do, which helps people's grades out, the scores were so high that it would have taken people's grades down if I applied the curve mathematically perfectly. Now, I didn't do that. I instead was forced to just give you your raw score. So for those of you that scored from the area of about 77%, 78% or higher on the exam, you just got the raw score. You just got the raw percentage score. And that's that. So what you will notice is that the more people score really, really high on the test, the less it helps you on the curve. And, that's not good. That's not good. I want to know what people are getting for real on the test. So I'm just going to tell you from here forth, don't do it. I won't be able to catch you, probably. You'll get away with it. Congratulations. But what you won't get away with is your integrity, because that catches up to you. And cheating on tests means that you'll go in and you'll take the AP exam and you'll fail it, because you may not be able to find the answers when you take that. So that's all I'm going to say. I really hope that we're all being honest, and that we're not prioritizing the very short-sighted goal of getting good grades and sacrificing our integrity while we do it, because you can't get that back. That's enough on that. Let's move over to the PowerPoint and address the things that we need to talk about for today. So we left off talking about entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are a class of highly inventive, motivated people who possess the technological skills necessary to partake in both business and in new business ventures, and were willing to take risks. And many young men from the gentry, which is kind of the upper middle class or lower aristocracy, undertook careers in business. And what we're seeing with the Industrial Revolution is that the middle class during this time is widening. The Industrial Revolution widens the number of people who consider themselves part of the middle class, and they start to accumulate a little bit of wealth. And when they accumulate some excess money, they then take that money and rise into the nobility from the wealth that they created in business by investing that money in business opportunities on new ventures. Kind of like the show Shark Tank, like we were talking about a couple of days ago. The other thing that engenders the middle class is this spirit that has characterized both British and American history for a long time, known as quote-unquote Protestant work ethic. The idea that if you are working hard and you are being rewarded with your hard work by making money, that is a sign that God is looking favorably upon you and rewarding you. And this is probably more prominent in America than it is in Britain, but surely the British history of Protestantism, definitely contributed to this idea of British exceptionalism, and the idea that the harder and working and more money the British people made, the more favorably they were viewed by God. The colonial empire that Britain had during this time was absolutely massive, and they were able to utilize all of these different colonies around the globe by extracting various raw materials necessary for industrialization and the development of industry back in England. Not to mention, while on one hand they are taking raw materials from their colonies and bringing them back to Britain, they then will take those raw materials, make them into finished manufactured goods, machine-made factory goods, and then bring those finished goods back to their colonies and sell the finished goods for a profit on the tail end. So the British are very much winning on both sides in the game of global industry, because they are not only able to acquire tons and tons and tons of cheap raw materials utilizing labor sources from across the globe, they then are able to take those goods that they make and sell them to those same exact people whose labor they are exploiting. So they are making money on the front end, and they're making money on the back end of all of this trade. The role of government was very important during this time, because remember that the British government was made up of the bourgeoisie at this time. So thanks, Teddy, that's fine. I appreciate you letting me know, not a problem. So the bourgeoisie is the upper middle class. And remember that the bourgeoisie, much like in Paris, they, just as in London and everywhere else, the bourgeoisie is going to be this new middle industrial class that's looking to make a lot of money. And they believe in the spirit of liberal Enlightenment principles. So they believe heavily in Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, which talked all about free market capitalism, laissez-faire economics, where the government stays out of private business and allows private businesses to grow. So because the government in Britain, Parliament at this time, is made up of this bourgeois class, it stands to reason that, of course, the kinds of laws that they will be passing are ones that match and benefit their own personal well-being, their own personal beliefs about the economy. And so the middle class benefits from the government being sympathetic to industrial development and having Britain's financial institutions make loans available to businesses who are trying to get off the ground. Limited monarchy meant that the government does not stifle the growth and expansion of the middle class. And because their government was so stable, particularly after the Napoleonic Wars, the successful outcome of these wars meant that Britain was not completely devastated. Whereas Napoleon had been able to go and invade all of these different places across the continent, he was never able to make a land invasion of Britain. And this allowed Britain's government to maintain a lot of stability during this time. The House of Commons increasingly becomes an instrument of the middle class, the bourgeoisie, in order to gain government cooperation and secure more middle class loyalty as increasing numbers of people enter into this bourgeois business class. Parliamentary legislation was favorable towards the growth of industry. So they're passing laws that deregulate the economy and allow factories and other businesses to grow in all sorts of different avenues. Meanwhile, you have a growing demand for textiles, cloth at this time, which led to the creation of the world's first large-scale factories, namely in Manchester. However, the bottleneck, the part of the entire process of textile manufacturing that was slowing everything down, was spinning thread. And that's why inventions like the spinning jenny, inventions like the water frame, these massive spinning machines start to undergo new modifications and innovations. They start to be built on larger scales. They start to be powered by steam engines, which, as it says on point 3 here, was probably the key event of the Industrial Revolution, because what they're really focused on is this one part of the process that slows everything down. It bottlenecks everything. Okay, that phrase bottleneck, think about if you had a cup of water versus a bottle of water. The bottle narrows at the top, and that means that the water is going to dump out of it more slowly than if you had like a mug and you just dump the water out onto the ground. So it slows it down, right? Okay, the spinning process of creating thread was the slowest part of the textile industry. Once you had the thread, it was relatively straightforward to take it and turn it into cloth. But the actual making of enough thread to produce cloth was the slow part. Also at this time, you're seeing metallurgical industries flourish as they provide the machinery. The machines themselves, the factories and building materials themselves are going to be made out of metal, and then of course powered by the mining industry, which is investing in mining coal and things like that. To talk a little bit about art of the 19th century, we, as we have moved throughout the class, talked about a number of different art movements of the Renaissance, of the Baroque period, of the Rococo art movement, Neoclassicism, and now we are entering into the 19th century art movements. And the first major art movement of the 19th century is going to be an art movement known as Romanticism. Now, Romanticism falls out of favor by about the mid-19th century, the mid-1800s, right about the same time that this painting was produced. Now, I would still qualify this as largely a pretty romantic piece of art. And it's an unusual painting in some sense because in the foreground, we have kind of this rustic, natural beauty portrayed of Manchester, where they make Manchester look kind of like this rustic, beautiful place where nature is still in touch with people. But I'm going to give you a reading here in a little bit that I will actually read for you at the end of class, that I think will give you a slightly different mental picture than this gives you here in this painting about what Manchester was really like during the age of industry. One of the things that makes this painting very unusual is that in the foreground you have this, you have this really rustic, beautiful nature picture of what Manchester's natural beauty allegedly looks like. And then in the background, you can see kind of this darker, looming urban sprawl that's churning coal smoke out into the sky, that is still somehow nonetheless depicted in this image romantically, as though it's somehow this kind of beautiful, distant urban center that's providing this wealth of industry to Britain. In all reality, of course, Manchester is, by all definitions, an absolute slum. Okay, Manchester, as cities go in this time, you have to understand that the cities of old Europe, like Manchester, London, Paris, you name it, virtually any centuries-old city or urban area in Europe was originally made back in the medieval ages, meaning that they were built with castles and dungeons and walls around them, and they were never really meant to expand. Not to mention, they were already super crowded even before the process of urbanization starts to happen at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution period. So what we see happen here during this time, as people flock away from farms and to cities to seek out wage labor style work, what we ultimately end up seeing happen is that these cities, which had been built hundreds of years ago, are hopelessly ill-equipped to deal with this massive influx of population. And very quickly, we see city municipal services like sewer systems and so on and so forth overwhelmed by the total influx of this mass migration of rural peasants to become urban population workers in these regions. And as a result of that, due to the massive overcrowding in these cities, the rivers that run through them, this is Manchester, which is situated near a river, London, which has the Thames, which runs through it as well. These become basically open sewers, okay? The rivers that are running through London, Manchester, any major city in Europe at this time during the Industrial Revolution are so horribly polluted. They stink, they smell like raw sewage. You have open drains and gutters running through people's homes, running through the streets, people just throwing trash and human excrement and other things right out onto the sidewalks. Because of that, it's extremely dirty. The city is so overcrowded that disease is rampant. Cholera, typhoid fever, and various other illnesses are spreading around like plagues at this time. The water is dirty. You would never want to have drank the water in England, basically anywhere. That's why so much of the diet of English people was made up of beer instead of water, because the beer was like fermented and filtered and wouldn't make you sick, whereas the water would. And so, because it has people's fecal matter in it. And so these cities are completely ill-equipped, and urban planning really is something that's a post-industrial revolution invention, because they had to start thinking about how do we plan to build cities to accommodate huge populations that are going to be trying to travel around the city, get around town, utilize public services, things like sanitation systems, trash removal systems, and other things. All of these things have to be thought about. They have to think about how to redesign the cities to widen the roads. So from the old medieval roads that were really narrow and you could barely fit two people walking side by side through some of the narrow alleys and corridors. Also, I just want to diverge from the PowerPoint here for a second. I want to show you just how different it is of a city that was first a medieval city, a pre-industrial revolution city, compared to the urban planning and design of a post-industrial revolution city. Okay, let's go to maps. Okay, and I'm going to pull up London. All right, we'll go over to London, and I want to show you how the streets of London work. If we zoom into the streets of London, look at how chaotic they are. Okay, they go every which direction. Look at this. All right, it's almost hard to even see. Okay, we're going to build a road that starts here. We're going to go here, and then we're going to have it go up this way, and then we're going to have go, and then we'll reconnect it back around this way. And this one we're just going to have start and stop right there. And then this one we're going to make into a, well, there's a building here, so we're going to have to build around that, right? And then they just have to, they're building all these roads. These are old medieval roads that go around buildings. They start, they stop, there's dead ends, they curve around. You never know which way you're moving. Getting around London was an absolute nightmare and a half. Now, if we zoom the camera out to the what we start to see happen, of course, as the cities expand, is they start building bigger roads around the city. And all roads start to lead to the center of London. So take a look at this for a second here. As we zoom the map out, we can start to see a larger system of freeways that are built around London in a very spider web orientation, where you have concentric circles that develop around the town of around the urban center, with kind of tangent lines that all lead to the center of London. Okay, and so this is how urban development tends to proliferate in cities that were originated pre-industrially. Go up to Manchester. Okay, let's go up to Manchester. You'll see the same thing. Look, an inner circle, a wider outer circle, and a wider outer circle from that, with a bunch of spiderwebby lines that lead you directly to the city center. This is very, very different comparative to if we look at Los Angeles, which is a post-industrially designed, planned urban area. Look at how Los Angeles is. Look at the cities, or look at the streets rather. Already you can see they are set up in virtually a perfect grid format. Look how different this is from how London streets are. Sure, you've got some development neighborhoods here with some windier roads and stuff, but for the most part, as you scroll all throughout Los Angeles, you see a whole bunch of just blocks of streets. And the reason they design it that way is because it makes it 10 times easier to get around. Meanwhile, also, we see the freeway system designed as a grid as well. Look at how it forms tic-tac-toe boxes virtually all across the Southern California area, with a handful of exceptions of freeways that run diagonally that run parallel with the coastline. But aside from that, you've got various different freeways. You've got the 57. You've got the 605. I don't know why this says 39 because I think that's the 55 free. Oh wait, here's the 55 freeway over here. Here's the 55. Okay, the 91 runs east and west. The 57 runs north and south. This is Imperial Avenue. This is the 60, the 10. They're all parallel lines perpendicular with the other freeways that run the opposite direction. And this makes it, again, very, very easy to get across town in a formulaic way, all right, comparative to London, which is kind of a giant nightmare. Now, the next thing that I wanted to show you is this piece by Alexis de Tocqueville. Alexis de Tocqueville was a French traveler and intellectual who traveled all around the world. He went to America, he went to Britain, and so on and so forth. And Alexis de Tocqueville took detailed notes on his voyages, on his journeys. And one of the most famous pieces by Alexis de Tocqueville is his testimonial about Manchester. And I want you to be thinking as I read this for you here today, and I'll put this link into the chat here so you can have that if you want to pull it up on your own screen. This is a primary historical resource from Alexis de Tocqueville called Journeys to England and Ireland. And on July 2nd, 1835, that's right after Manchester starts building massive factories and stuff like that, Alexis de Tocqueville goes to visit Manchester. And as I read this for you, I want you to be thinking about how Alexis de Tocqueville is drawing a very deliberate and stark comparison or description of Manchester, where on one hand, he basically says Manchester is a city that reaches the peak of human civilization on one hand, and on the other hand, reduces humanity to its most brutal and savage form. Okay, so he is describing for you the stark economic situation where you have this very, very, very select group of prosperous bourgeois business owners and the masses of the workers who sustain that business that live in absolute abject poverty. So please listen carefully as I read this piece for you. The peculiar character of Manchester, the great manufacturing city for cloth, thread, cotton, as is Birmingham for iron, copper, and steel. Favorable circumstances. So he starts by listing some favorable assets to Manchester. 10 leagues from the largest port in England, which is the best placed port in Europe for receiving raw materials from America safely and quickly. Close by the largest coal mines to keep the machines going cheaply. 25 leagues away, the place where the best machines in the world are made. 3 canals and a railway quickly carry the products all over England and over the whole world. The employers, he's still talking about favorable circumstances here. The employers are helped by science, industry, the love of gain, and English capital. Among the workers are men coming from a country where the needs of men are reduced almost to those of savages, and who can work for a very low wage, and so keep down the level of wages for the English workmen who wish to compete to almost the same level. So he goes on to say, so there is the combination of the advantages of a rich and of a poor country, of an ignorant and an enlightened people of both civilization and barbarism. So it is not surprising that Manchester already has 300,000 inhabitants and is growing at a prodigious rate. Now he goes on to describe with painstaking illustrative language, descriptive language, how absolutely miserable Manchester was for the vast majority of people living there in Manchester or right around it, much to the contrast of how this painting here might make us think about what Manchester actually looked like at that time. So please listen carefully as I read for you this next section. 30 or 40 factories rise on the tops of the hills I have just described. Their 6 stories tower up. Their huge enclosures give notice from afar of the centralization of industry. The wretched dwellings of the poor are scattered haphazardous around them. Round them, outermore, stretches land uncultivated, but without the charm of rustic nature and still without the amenities of a town. Picture almost like a construction site where it's been torn up, but nothing yet is built on it. The soil has been taken away, scratched and torn up in 1,000 places, but it is not yet covered with the habitations of men. The land is given over to industry's use. Heaps of dung, rubble from buildings, putrid, stagnant pools are found here and there among the houses and over the bumpy, pitted surfaces of the public places. No trace of surveyor's rod or spirit level. Amid this noisome labyrinth, this great quarters set apart home of vice and poverty, which surrounds the huge palaces of industry and clasp them in their hideous folds. On the ground below the level of the river and overshadowed on the side by immense workshops stretches marshy, swampy land, which widely spaced muddy ditches can neither drain nor cleanse. Narrow, twisting roads lead down to it. They are lined with one-story houses whose ill-fitting planks and broken windows show them up even from a distance as the last refuge a man might find between poverty and death. Nonetheless, the wretched people reduced to living in these places can still inspire jealousy of their fellow beings, because below some of their miserable dwellings is a row of cellars to which a sunken corridor leads, where 12 to 15 human beings are crowded pell-mell into each of these damp, repulsive holes. The fetid, muddy waters, stained with 1,000 colors by the factories they pass of one of the streams I mentioned before, wander slowly round this refuge of poverty. They are nowhere kept in place by quays. Houses are built haphazard on their banks. Often from the top of their steep banks, one sees an attempt at a road opening out through the debris of earth, and the foundations of some houses or the recent ruins of others. It is the sticks of this new Hades. A sort of black smoke covers the city. The sun, seen through the smoke, is a disk without rays. Under this half daylight, 300,000 human beings are ceaselessly at work. 1,000 noises disturb this damp, dark labyrinth. but they are not at all the ordinary sounds one hears in great cities. The footsteps of a busy crowd, the crunching wheels of machinery, the shriek of steam from boilers, the regular beat of the looms, the heavy rumble of carts. Those are the noises from which you can never escape in the somber half-light of these streets. From this foul drain, the greatest stream of human industry flows out to fertilize the whole world. From this filthy sewer, pure gold flows. Here, humanity attains its most complete development and its most brutish. Here, civilization works its miracles, and civilized man is turned back almost into a savage. And that is probably one of the most unbelievable pieces of writing to describe the just absolute misery of the conditions of the working class living in Manchester from about 1830 until about 1920 or 30, somewhere in that area, where things start to really change around. Evelyn, you asked the question, is Manchester still like that today? To be honest, of all places that you'd want to go and live, Manchester's probably not at the top of the list, okay? It is still it's kind of like the Cleveland of England, okay? Think of it that way. It's just an old manufacturing town. It is somewhat run down. It's not as bad as it was. I'm sure there's some very nice places around Manchester, but it's probably not the #1 place you'd want to live, okay? Anyhow, that gives you a description. Folks, I have more or less exhausted my time. I do want to just point out to you, though, one last thing before we go, and that is that, on the PowerPoint here, on this slide, it shows you the average age at death. Look at what happens with the Industrial Revolution. The rural districts, like, for example, Rutland is rural. That's farmland. People are living into their 50s, 40s, 30s, and frankly, these numbers are a little skewed because these numbers include infant and childhood deaths. Really, to be honest with you, if you were living at the time, if you lived until you were 18, the chances of you making it to your 60s or 70s in rural areas was actually relatively good. Okay, but because they're factoring in the infant and childhood deaths, it brings the averages down significantly. But look at what happens with Leeds and Manchester after the Industrial Revolution. Literally, people's lifespans in the early days of industrialism, half. They are cut in half. Okay, that means that if you were a teenager living in Manchester in 1835, you could probably expect to maybe survive your junior year, and that would probably be about it, and that would be the average. I want you to just think about how absolutely horrendous the conditions have to be in order for the life expectancy to be literally cut in half in the span of about 30 to 50 years during the Industrial Revolution. So. Now, of course, over time, just to be clear with you, over time, as reforms are made, laws are made, safety building codes are made, public health laws are made, and so on, of course, over time, the middle class expands, people start making more money, they're less vulnerable, the cities start to become cleaner and less dangerous to live in and stuff like that. And life expectancy actually over time with Industrial Revolution actually goes up. But that's not before it takes a major dip in the early days. And that's pretty commonplace no matter where you're looking at, no matter what time you're looking at in history across the entire planet. Folks, that brings me to the end of my lecture today. I do want to wish you a happy Friday and have a wonderful weekend. I will be putting up new questions for the Chapter 20 reading guide on Canvas, so please do make sure that you get that done by Tuesday. We have a 3-day weekend. Have a good rest of your day and a wonderful weekend.